Hello and welcome to the Nexus. Today's show, just three little letters, MBS. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is in Washington, cozying up to Donald Trump. So it's time we found out more about the KSA-USA relationship. What do Trump and MBS have in common? And what are they plotting when it comes to Iran? Also ahead, the royal flush. MBS is cracking down on his miscreant cousins, but is being banged up in the Ritz-Carlton really so tough? And finally, can Saudi Arabia go back to the future? We look at MBS's plans to reform the kingdom by learning from its past. All that and more here in the Nexus. Hello, I'm Matthew Moore, and today we are looking at the man shaking up Saudi Arabia and making waves internationally. We have a great panel for you, including Ian Black of the London School of Economics. We also have Ahmed Al-Ibrahim. He's from Riyadh. He's very proud of his country and its new leader. And finally, from New Jersey, we have Terry Strada. Now, she lost her husband in the 9/11 attacks and is watching this visit by MBS very closely indeed. So now we're all together, let's look at Saudi Arabia's foreign policy, focusing particularly on Yemen and Iran, and of course, KSA-USA.
Saudi Arabia is a very wealthy nation, and they're going to give the United States some of that wealth. $525 million, $1.2 billion, $3 billion, $3.8 billion, $6 billion, that's for frigates.
$200 billion US of opportunity in the next 4 years.
That's peanuts for you. 40,000 jobs.
4 million jobs in the US of America, directly and indirectly.
Jobs for our people.
More than 35%.
Close to 100%.
400 billion.
700 billion.
And that's why we are here today.
Tremendous investments made.
And also get rid of all the threats facing our both countries and the whole world.
Thank you very much.
The United Nations said this week that over 10,000 people have been killed in Yemen under the U.S.-backed Saudi-led bombing campaign.
17 million people risk starvation. We should not be supporting this effort.
We're deeply concerned by the recent surge in civilian casualties in Yemen as a result of intensified airstrikes.
Why? Why Yemen? What they want from Yemen? Why they are killing us? Why they are killing our children and families?
We're involved in advising the Saudis about their bombing of Yemen. She should be absolutely ashamed of herself.
It cannot be right that her government is colluding in what the United Nations says is evidence of war crimes.
I will be raising concerns about human rights with the Crown Prince when I meet him.
There's a civil war in Yemen right now where the Saudis, with U.S. help, have intervened on the side of the government against the rebels who are believed to be backed by Iran. So it's more than anything, it's a proxy conflict between Saudi and Iran.
The Saudis are very happy with the direction of U.S. foreign policy. They're very happy with the tough anti-Iran stand that Washington is taking.
Everywhere you look, if there's trouble in the region, you find Iran.
I've seen that you called the Ayatollah Khamenei the new Hitler of the Middle East.
Absolutely. Iran is in violation of the UN resolutions with regards to ballistic missiles. It exports ballistic missiles to the Houthis, who then use it to target civilians inside Yemen as well as inside Saudi Arabia.
Does Saudi Arabia need nuclear weapons to counter Iran?
Saudi Arabia does not want to acquire any nuclear bomb. But without a doubt, if Iran developed a nuclear bomb, we will follow suit as soon as possible.
Well, let's get to the purpose of this whole trip now to the United States. Ahmed Al-Ibrahim, if I could start with you in Riyadh. You know, in doing research for this program, I spoke to a Saudi dissident who's living in Washington, D.C., and he said essentially that MBS's trip to London and now to Washington is essentially a job interview, and that it will be decided by essentially the West whether he goes on to become the king. Is that right?
That's absolutely wrong. I don't think this is absolutely insane. He's a crown prince, and this is his first visit to the United States as a crown prince. He's cementing the relationship with the American administration and with the Congress and with the American people. Also, he's doing a long tour in order to get some businesses back to Saudi Arabia and co-invest in the companies in the United States.
Okay, let me go to Ian Black. Ian, do you think it is more business or foreign policy or a mixture of the two?
Well, I think it's perfectly clear that it's a mixture of those things. There are huge issues of investment, which works both ways. We've seen President Trump bragging about the amount of money that's going to be transacted.
Yes, I mean, it was bragging, wasn't it? It was so constant, the harping on about the billions and the millions and the billions, that even a wealthy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was blushing.
It underlines that word that people often use about President Trump. His attitude to things is transactional. It's all about the deal. This young, dynamic Crown Prince is somebody who he can do business with, literally as well as metaphorically.
Which is certainly Trump's favourite subject. I'm going to come back to the business and the foreign policy in a moment. First, Terry, I'd like to come to you for a moment. You're suing the Saudi government over the 9/11 attacks on behalf of thousands of people related to the victims. And we will get to that later in the programme. But first, tell me, just, how do you feel seeing the Crown Prince meeting the President at the White House? Is this a positive thing, or does it disturb you?
Well, I understand why he's here, but yes, it disturbs me on a personal level very much. He's very insincere. I don't trust him. I don't believe him until he comes clean with what happened on 9/11 and the murder of 3,000 people on American soil.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Now, at the beginning of that report, we did see both leaders constantly talking about business and money, millions and millions and billions and billions. Saudi Arabia is America's second biggest oil supplier, selling around about 1 million barrels per day. So if you take that over a year, around about $60 a barrel, that's $22 billion. It's a huge amount of trade. Now, on the other way around, if you flip this, back in 2017 when Trump was visiting in Riyadh, they signed a deal, $110 billion worth there, and that could only increase. Let me come to you, Ian Black. Now, the United Nations is saying that, because we know that what the Saudi action in Yemen is its biggest theatre of war, and that has proved to be a very difficult theatre and perhaps very costly in terms of public relations. Do you think that the Saudis want to get out of this conflict now?
It is a war that is causing huge suffering. It's being described by aid agencies as the world's biggest humanitarian crisis. The Americans and the British governments and other Western powers are involved because they support the Saudi government. They sell it weapons, and their militaries collaborate up to a point with the conduct of the war. So it's a big problem for a kingdom which is trying to present itself under this new man as something progressive.
Ahmed Al-Ibrahim, MBS was the defence minister when the bombing began in Yemen. Can you see any signs from him now that he really wants to stop this campaign?
Well, the minute this war has started, MBS wanted to stop it, whether the second day or the third day, putting harsh target to basically disable the enemy. However, as the war started, more influence has came from Iran to the Houthi rebels, and more money has pushed to the rebels in order to fight Saudi Arabia. It's very simple, and MBS actually said it on 60 Minutes. What happened if Iran put out a militia on the south border of the United States and Mexico? What's the U.S. going to do? This is our border. This is who we need to protect. We need to protect the Saudi citizens.
Ahmed,
we need to protect this
Ahmed,
economy.
We
cannot
first?
have rebels
the
are
aerial
supported
bombing,
by the enemies.
Ahmed, which came first, though? The aerial bombing, a sustained and massive campaign, or a small number of rockets, although they have no right to fire into your country, of course, but a small number of rockets said to be made in Iran? I mean, is that a proportionate response?
Well, when somebody actually attacks a sovereign country, that's a sign of war.
I do want to bring in Terry at this moment. I mean, Terry, this isn't obviously your area of expertise, but you're an American and you're watching this. You're watching the fact that the British arms sales and American arms sales have gone up tremendously since the war in Yemen began. As an American, how does that make you feel?
As an American citizen, it makes me sad and it's frustrating. I don't particularly like that we're involved in this. I would prefer that the Americans stop selling them arms to do what they're doing to Yemen, but that isn't my call at all.
Let's look back at candidate Trump now and what he said about Saudi Arabia. Have a listen to this.
So we defend Saudi Arabia. Every time there's a problem, we send our ships, we go crazy, right? We spend a fortune. We get paid peanuts for this. They're making $1 billion a day. I'm not saying don't defend them. I'm saying we have to be reimbursed. We have to be paid when we do this.
Tough words from Donald Trump. Ahmed Al-Ibrahim, I'd have to come back to you. Has Donald Trump presented your government with a bill for protecting Saudi Arabia?
Well, this particular message was for the campaign message, and this is for local consumption. There is some of the American people, they would like this kind of tone and talk from Donald Trump. And we know actually when he met MBS at the Oval Office, he mentioned that Saudi Arabia is a wealthy country and, they're going to support us in doing job. And guess what? This is the America we know. We help them economically. They give us more transfer of technology. But the difference with MBS is whatever he's investing right now, he's getting so much back for his dollar that he's investing in America.
Thank you for that. Let's get into the domestic situation now. We'll begin with a quick look at where his power comes from and making sure that no one can take it from him.
The monarchy and the clergy. Both institutions have grown strong and tall in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, a country which exists on ancient land, but as a nation is actually very young. Its first king and founder, Abdulaziz ibn Saud, only established the kingdom in 1932, unifying the peninsula by spending years fighting and conquering rival kingdoms and tribes. And somehow he found the time to produce 45 sons from 22 wives. It's not clear how many daughters he had, perhaps a detail overlooked because women aren't allowed to rule the country anyway. Since he died in 1953, 6 of his sons have ruled as king. The current ruler is King Salman. Breaking with tradition, he has no plans to hand over power to his brothers. In fact, he named his son, Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS for short, as Crown Prince last year. And MBS has been quick to stamp his authority on the family and the nation, beginning an anti-corruption drive late last year. He locked up hundreds of super wealthy relatives and others accused of financial crimes at this luxury hotel, the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh. 5 stars, 6 restaurants, 2 ballrooms and a spa. If that's jail, lock me up. So-called inmates were detained for nearly 3 months until they agreed to pay massive fines. For example, MBS's own cousin, billionaire Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, or as one of the Trumps call him, Dopey, is said to have paid $7 billion. Another cousin, Prince Mohammed bin Abdullah, the former Minister of the National Guard, paid $1 billion for his freedom. While keeping fellow royals in check, MBS also let religious figures know who's boss. After all, Saudi Arabia is an Islamic theocratic monarchy where citizens are legally required to be Muslims. Wahhabi clerics have great influence, and the king's authority is somewhat dependent on their support. But MBS's crackdown has reportedly seen at least 10 clerics detained. He's taken aim at Saudi's influential religious police too, stripping them of their powers to arrest people. MBS says he wants a more moderate Islam in Saudi Arabia. So the message to potential rivals, from fabulously rich princes to the kingdom's clergy, is clear. Don't even think of taking me on.
Locked up at the Ritz-Carlton. Ahmed, let me come to you for a moment. From the outside world, when you see people detained at the Ritz-Carlton, that's their holiday dream for them. I need to ask you, is this a crackdown on corruption or a crackdown on dissent?
Corruption has infiltrated in the Saudi system down to the ground. So what is needed to be done, the MBS needed to shock the system. And I think that was the right formula in shocking the system. How it does it, how did it plan, how all this has come from a financial background, which is I'm not aware of it. But this definitely has sent a message through the system that corruption is not, wanted. And to my best knowledge, this is only the tip of the iceberg.
And reports that there have been people tortured?
Nobody has tortured. Everybody was dealt by the order of the king in a very good manners. And if it comes down, if somebody is, needed to sell his home, his personal home was exempted from that.
Okay.
So it was a very fair deal for the people who actually been involved in the corruption.
Ian Black, a crackdown on corruption or dissent?
Well, I think that it's a crackdown on wealthy individuals who, because of their royal connections or their business empires, were able to amass huge fortunes. And bin Salman wanted to present himself as a reformer.
What about the other strong institution in Saudi Arabia, the clergy? There have been some detentions. What do we know about that? What type of clerics were they, and what's happened now?
Well, I actually think that the question of the religious establishment in Saudi Arabia and how it responds to bin Salman is really one of the most interesting questions about what's going on. It's also very difficult to understand. We don't know to a large degree. We know that certain individuals have been silenced, locked up, and so on and so forth.
Are they Wahhabi clerics? Are they Shia clerics? Ahmed, do you know anything about this?
What bin Salman is doing, MBS, he's trying not to reinvent Islam. He just wants to go to the Islam before 1979. So in order to do that, there is a lot of people from the religious scholars that actually been infiltrated into the system, and they started to be an instigator, and they gained power. In order to move this country, which is based on religion and politics, in order to take it to the front, you need to diffuse these mics and actually make it absolute mute in order to take it this forward.
Thank you, Ahmed. Let's go back to Terry Strada now. As one of the spokespeople for the 9/11 families, tell us why you're suing the Saudi government over the 9/11 attacks.
Because after 9/11, there was an investigation, and a lot of the evidence that has been collected points a strong finger at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We know that they had handlers put in this country that met the hijackers out in California, and they were on the Saudi payroll. The handlers were, and for all these years, we've been trying to get this evidence into a courtroom, and the Saudis have fought us tooth and nail in Congress, in Washington, D.C., millions and millions of dollars. They fight the 9/11 families. They fight the victims of the terrorist attack that they are responsible for.
I want to come back to Ahmed. I think it's only fair. I mean, of course, the Saudis are going to dispute that there was any official handling of these people, but we have them here. I mean, there were 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis, and even MBS says, yes, that is true, but he does have some qualifying remarks to make. Ahmed, if you could just take that up, please.
Terry, you know, I feel for you. There's nothing shocking for us like 9/11. Those terrorists who went into the tower, they actually bombed my distant cousin in one of the compounds in Riyadh. So I know how you feel, and I know what this caused for you. But Saudi Arabia has an unprecedented track in fighting terrorism worldwide. They prevented so many attacks on the American soil. We are not using lobbyists to make our, bad doing right.
No, now he's lying. Okay, now he's outright lying. Yes, they have spent millions of dollars on at least 17 lobbying firms in this country. Do not tell the public that there is no evidence when there is evidence that
Terry,
the handlers that were here in the United States were on the Saudi payroll, on your government's payroll, on the kingdom's payroll. Okay, it's on their letterhead. You are denying things that you need to come into a courtroom. No, excuse me.
If Saudi Arabia.
Stop. I'm speaking now. We have a lawsuit, and you need to come into the courtroom and face the evidence in a courtroom and quit going around spreading lies and things that aren't true. That is what you are famous for. And stop it. It is an insult to this country. It is an insult to my husband. No,
Terry, if we fight, if we have a 17 lobbyists,
Terry, you're going to give.
If we have a 17 lobbyists,
Terry, you made your point. We're going to give Ahmed a quick chance to come back on that.
We didn't pass the Congress. JASTA has already passed the Congress.
That's right. And what did you do? You came back in the lame duck session, and then you came back and you had our U.S. veterans coming into Washington, D.C. on your time.
It's still there.
You paid their trips to come to Washington, D.C. and ask for an amendment or to get rid of JASTA because you are a coward and you are afraid to come into a courtroom and face the evidence that we have against you.
The court case may or may not come to fruition. If it does, we will see what the U.S. Justice makes of it. And, of course, the Saudis will then have their right to respond. But we ought to move on to the rest of the programme here, and MBS's shake-up of Saudi Arabia doesn't stop at detaining a few princes in the Ritz-Carlton. He actually has a plan to push the country forward, partly by bringing back some of the better aspects of the kingdom's past pre-1979, so they say. In other words, taking it back to the future.
Firmly in the driving seat, Mohammed bin Salman has a plan to take Saudi Arabia back to the future. His Vision 2030 aims to bring this ultra-conservative society bang up to date, relatively at least. First, he's tinkering with women's rights.
A royal decree has been issued in Saudi Arabia giving women the right to drive.
And for the first time ever, from June, women will be able to drive. He's also allowed women into sports stadiums for the first time. Headline-grabbing changes for sure, but don't forget, guardianship laws still apply. Now that means that women under 45 can't travel abroad or even study without the permission of a male relative. Dad, uncle, even a son's permission will do.
Come on, man!
And MBS is trying to make life a little more fun for Saudis. For example, lifting a 35-year ban on public cinemas in the kingdom. Movie anyone? He also plans to develop a Sharia-free resort zone on the Red Sea to boost tourism. But free time for Saudi nationals might be harder to come by in the future, with MBS trying to fill up the workforce with Saudi citizens through something he calls Saudization. That may be bad news for the 10 million or so foreign workers who already live there. They could be forced to leave, being hit with high fees and taxes to push them out. MBS is also trying to fill up the state coffers by selling a small part of Saudi Aramco, the world's biggest oil company. So, some political, social and financial reforms, but there is no escaping some awful home truths in Saudi Arabia. Executions have doubled since MBS came to power. Human rights activists reporting that many of those people were killed just for speaking out against the royal family. So, Vision 2030, is it just great PR and high-profile promises, or is the kingdom really on the road to reform?
Let's go to Ian Black now. Ian, when they talk about returning to a better period that was before 1979, which of course the year Iran had its Islamic Revolution, what do they mean? And is it just looking at the country through rose-tinted spectacles, or were things really better before 1979?
Well, I think what's indisputable is that the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran had a huge impact. And the fear of a religiously, ideologically inspired revolution had an effect on Saudi Arabia and other conservative monarchies. And in Saudi Arabia in particular, it increased the strength, the power of the conservative religious establishment. They'd always played an important role in Saudi Arabia. What's happening now is that bin Salman is challenging that relationship, and that is really one of the most innovative and interesting and potentially destabilizing parts of the very ambitious things that he's trying to do. It also helps, of course, to be able to blame it all on Iran, which is very much the strategic rivalry at the heart of this story.
Everything goes back to Iran, it seems. Let me go back to Ahmed. Ahmed, when you look at Saudi Arabia from the outside, all you think about is fabulous wealth. Rolls-Royce, Bentleys, oil, money splashed everywhere. Everyone's being subsidized. The truth is, Saudi Arabia is actually going through a bit of a tough patch at the moment, with oil prices at around $60 a barrel. Perhaps even a recession going on. Now, how is that going down with ordinary Saudis who are suddenly being told, look, you're going to have to pull your weight. You're going to have to contribute to the economy and get a job. Is that a shock to the system or a good thing?
Absolutely, it's shocking to the system. The Saudis are readapting really quick. But I think what's the whole reform that MBS is trying to do, of course, is not pleasing the West. It's basically he wants to reform everything within his country so he can sustain. Because if he was going on the old method where everything is subsidized and everything is as ridiculous prices, the country cannot sustain. So definitely the average Saudi over here is in shock. He's changing his habit. People are changing their ACs, changing their lights. They're having less and less trash to be thrown away. So actually they are he's structuring the whole economy of Saudi Arabia and the behavior of the Saudi man.
Terry, for you and for many Americans, Saudi Arabia will always be linked to the terrible 9/11 attacks. But when you look at the country now and you see reforms are being made. Even General Petraeus said it's more of a revolution than an evolution. Does it give you hope that this young country, where 75% of people are under 35, that this young country is going to change in the future?
I suppose, yes, there's hope that it is going to change, but until it takes responsibility for Wahhabism, extremism that they have spread across the world and that incited the 9/11 attacks, and that they are responsible for the murder of 3,000 people on American soil, Americans are never going to trust them, believe them, you know, welcome them.
And yet the political classes are very close to them and making huge business deals. Well, that is typical, really, of the disconnect between the people and the politicians. Terry Strada, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. Ahmed, Al-Ibrahim, thank you as well, shukran. And Ian Black, thank you for your analysis. Very much appreciated today in the Nexus. Well, that is all we have time for this week. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.